During a double date at AMC, I went to grab our drinks. When I returned early, my fiancé was on my friend's lap, shirt pulled up. He said, "We thought you'd be longer." I always thought double dates were harmless. People go because they want to mix things up, compare stories, laugh, and get a sense of how their relationships look from the outside. That was the vibe when Holland suggested we go out with Chase and his date, Mira, for a movie and dinner night. I agreed without hesitation. Chase had been my friend for years, and Holland seemed excited to show off our engagement ring to someone who didn't already know the story of how I proposed on the waterfront. I figured the night would be simple. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would tear a hole through my chest. We met at the AMC right across from the plaza, where the neon signs make every weekend feel like a festival. Holland arrived wearing a dark blue sweater she loved because it brought out her eyes. Chase strolled up like he owned the sidewalk, confident as ever, with Mira walking beside him. She seemed quiet, but warm. Not shy, just observant. She watched everything from a slight distance, like she was taking mental pictures before deciding how she felt about each one. I noticed Chase greeting Holland with a little too much enthusiasm. He gripped her shoulders longer than he needed to. She laughed louder than the moment required. When I stepped in to greet Mira, she smiled in a way that seemed almost apologetic, as if she were already aware something tonight was tilted. We grabbed our tickets and headed inside. The theater lobby had that mix of scent that's been the same since childhood: popcorn, soda syrup, and the faint smell of carpet cleaner. The four of us stood around deciding what snacks to grab before the preview started. Holland wanted a frozen lemonade. Chase asked for the biggest popcorn tub they had. Mira said she wasn't hungry, and I placed a mobile order for the drinks so I could grab them while the others found seats. The plan was simple. I would pick up the drinks at the concession counter while they headed into Theater 9. The movie was nothing special, just a light comedy that Holland had picked. I didn't feel any urgency when I walked over to the counter. The pre-order screen said 5 to 10 minutes. I knew Chase could entertain everyone in the meantime. He always loved being the center of attention. The order came out faster than I expected. When the staff handed me the drink tray, I checked the time and laughed to myself because I knew the others would assume I'd be gone longer. A quick interruption when nothing important is happening can lead to surprises, but nothing prepares you for returning to a moment that should not exist in the timeline of your life. I walked back into the hallway leading toward Theater 9. The dim lights reflected across the glossy floor. The theater doors were propped open, and I heard the muffled chatter of commercials playing before the trailers. As I turned the corner, I saw them. Holland, Chase, Mira sitting farther away. And then my mind stopped processing the world the way it usually did. Holland was perched on Chase's lap. Not accidentally. Not innocently. Her sweater was lifted enough that the skin along her stomach showed. Chase had his hands at her waist. Mira looked frozen, locked in place at the end of the row like she was witnessing a car accident she couldn't pull her eyes from. I didn't shout. I didn't drop the drinks. I simply stood there because my body required a full second to interpret the scene. Holland turned her head and her eyes went wide, but only for a moment. She jumped up, pulling her sweater down so fast that she fumbled with the sleeve. Chase leaned back in the seat with a look that was casual in a way I'd never seen someone try to be casual before. Mira stared at her knees. My first step forward felt like I was walking into someone else's life. The air in the theater felt too cold. The speakers played some upbeat promo that sounded bizarre paired with a heartbeat in my ears. Holland tried to approach me with a smile that didn't fit her face, as if she wanted to pretend this was nothing more than a misunderstanding. I didn't give her the chance to frame the scene. I asked her directly what in the world I had just walked into, and she reacted with a kind of frantic confusion that didn't match the reality of what I saw. She stepped closer and said she slipped. She said Chase was trying to help her. She said the sweater rode up by accident. She said I startled her. The words poured too fast and too disorganized to belong to someone telling the truth. Justifications collided, and none of them aligned with the way her hair was tousled or the way Chase kept relaxing deeper into his seat, observing me like I was part of some private joke. Mira shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. She looked like she wanted to intervene, but didn't know how. When our eyes met, she gave me the smallest shake of her head. Not a denial. A warning. A message. What Holland was saying wasn't real. Something else had been happening before I arrived. I placed the drinks on an empty chair and asked Holland again what was going on. She tried to guide me toward the exit, urging me to talk outside, insisting we shouldn't make a scene, even though the scene had already been made long before I showed up. Chase stood up slowly, stretched as if nothing serious was happening, and reached for his jacket. His expression was as smug as someone who had just dodged responsibility all his life and relied on charm to avoid consequences. I told him to stay where he was. He smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile people use when they want to provoke without saying anything directly. It made my stomach twist in a way that was almost physical. Mira stood up and walked toward us. She didn't step close enough to insert herself into the confrontation, but she placed herself at an angle where she could contribute without being pulled into the emotional crossfire. Her face had a heaviness that suggested she had been silently connecting dots since the moment we walked into the theater earlier. When I asked her what she saw before I arrived, Holland tried to interrupt, insisting that Mira didn't know the full story. Mira simply lifted her eyes toward me and said she saw more than she wanted to. That was enough to tilt the balance of the moment. Holland's control over the narrative cracked. The hallway grew louder as people entered the theater behind us, and the tension became too sharp to stay confined in a public place. Holland pulled my arm and said we needed to step outside immediately. Her voice carried panic laced with fury. Chase whispered something under his breath, and Mira pressed her lips together to avoid reacting. We walked out into the lobby. Holland latched onto my arm, trying to keep me moving so she could control the conversation. I refused. I didn't want to be guided anywhere. She spun around and said Chase practically forced her onto his lap. She said she tripped. She said she was reaching for something. She changed angles every few seconds like she was speed running through every excuse she could think of. I asked her why she was sitting on him in the first place. She had no answer. Her chest rose and fell faster as her mind tried to find the story that would stick. Chase and Mira walked out behind us a moment later. Mira kept her distance. Chase strolled up like he was on a break between jokes. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny anything. He just acted like none of this mattered. People in the lobby started watching because the body language between the four of us made it clear that something explosive was unfolding. Holland begged me to go to the parking lot. Her grip on my arm tightened. I shook her off. That's when Mira finally stepped forward and announced she needed to talk to me privately. Her voice didn't waver. She didn't sound like someone trying to cause trouble. She sounded like someone done with pretending things were normal. Holland protested immediately. Chase glared at Mira. I told Mira to go ahead. She said she saw something earlier that I needed to know. She didn't elaborate. She just insisted we leave the lobby and step outside. The tone she used carried a weight that kept me from questioning her. Something had been brewing long before the moment I walked back with the drinks. We stepped out into the cool night air of the plaza. The energy in my body felt sharp, restless, and ready for anything. I didn't know yet that anything was exactly what was waiting for me. The cool air outside the theater felt sharp enough to keep me alert. Mira stood a few feet away from me under one of the plaza lights, and the shadows around us flickered as cars rolled past. She kept her arms folded tightly, not to protect herself from the cold, but to brace against the tension she had been carrying since we all arrived. Holland hovered behind me, restless and irritated, desperate to steer the situation back under her control. Chase lingered several steps behind her, confident enough to pretend he wasn't worried about anything. Mira looked at me with this calm determination, the kind people get when keeping something inside would do more damage than letting it out. She told me she'd noticed things before the movie even started. She said Chase and Holland weren't acting like people who barely knew each other's boundaries. She'd seen them whispering behind us near the arcade area, standing closer than normal, touching each other whenever they thought she wasn't looking. Her voice stayed steady through all of it. Not dramatic, not emotional, just straightforward, because she understood someone had to be. Holland stepped forward immediately and told Mira she misunderstood everything, insisting that Chase had made her uncomfortable and she tried to push him away. It would have sounded believable if not for the look on Myra's face. She wasn't confused. She wasn't second-guessing herself. She stood firm. That alone unraveled the last bit of credibility Holland still had in the moment. Mira pulled out her phone and hesitated for just a moment before turning the screen toward me. She explained that while I was at the concession stand earlier, she recorded something because she sensed something was wrong. The video wasn't long, maybe 6 seconds, but it was enough. It showed Chase grabbing Holland's waist in the hallway, pulling her closer against him while she led him. Not a surprise moment, not a stumble. They looked like people who were used to touching each other. My stomach tightened as I watched it. It felt like my body had been shoved off a ledge. Holland instantly lunged to grab the phone from Mira, but Mira stepped back and told her not to touch it. Holland tried to claim the video didn't show the full context. She said she'd been trying to stop him, but the footage didn't look like someone resisting anything. It looked like two people who had crossed a line long before tonight. Chase stood there with a blank expression as if the entire situation bored him. He didn't act shocked when Mira showed me the video. He didn't even react. That stillness said more than anything he could have attempted to explain. I asked Holland again to tell me exactly what happened and whether what I saw at the theater doorway had been going on for longer. Instead of answering, she launched into a flurry of explanations that contradicted each other. She said she didn't want to hurt anyone. She said she didn't intend for anything to happen. She said it started as a misunderstanding. She said she only sat on Chase for a second because she thought the lights were off. She said she wasn't thinking clearly. Every sentence rearranged reality into a shape that suited her in that moment. Mira didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. A few people walking out of the theater slowed down to watch us. The plaza wasn't exactly empty, and the dynamic between the four of us looked intense enough to catch attention. Holland noticed the stares and became more frantic. She tried to push me toward the parking lot again, saying we shouldn't talk about private matters where strangers could hear. I stayed rooted where I was. Chase finally stepped closer, no urgency in his movements, no concern on his face. He looked at me with this lazy challenge, like he expected me to back down in the same way he assumed most people would. He told Holland she should stop stressing, which made her spin around and snap at him in a tone that suggested panic more than loyalty. That reaction confirmed something important. She knew she was caught, but she still wanted control. She pulled at my arm again. I told her to let go. She froze, then stepped back, breathing harder. Mira stayed close enough to support me, but far enough not to escalate things. She watched Chase like she was waiting for him to provoke me again. Something in her posture told me she had known for a while that Chase was hiding things from her. But tonight was the first time she'd seen it all without any way to deny it. At that point, the arguments between Holland and Chase started spilling into the open. Holland insisted Chase was lying. Chase smirked and asked her why she cared so much about appearances. Holland accused him of crossing a line she never wanted to cross. Chase shrugged like he didn't believe her. The entire conversation shifted from me to them without warning, revealing a dynamic that shouldn't have existed in the first place. I asked Holland directly how long this had been happening. She said nothing. She glanced at Chase, then at Mira, then at the ground. The silence felt heavier than anything she could have said. I stepped closer, asking again because silence works like a confession when someone refuses to break it. Before she could answer, Chase lifted his hands in a gesture that said he was tired of the conversation. He started walking toward the parking lot. Holland yelled after him not to leave. Mira called out too, her voice sharp and fed up. A few people across the plaza looked over. Holland went after him, and for a moment I stood there deciding whether to follow or let their mess unravel without me. But something in the situation felt incomplete. Something Mira said earlier, that she'd seen more than she wanted to, echoed in my head. There had to be more than a hallway video and a moment in the theater doorway. If they were reckless enough to behave like that inside an AMC, they had probably crossed boundaries long before tonight. And if Mira had been watching them the whole time, she must have seen things that built up to this moment. I walked after them. Mira followed me. We passed a row of closed storefronts and walked toward the side path that curved around the theater. The plaza lights grew dimmer back there, and the air carried the smell of trash from the dumpsters behind the building. People didn't usually go behind the theater unless they were employees taking out bags or teenagers sneaking away for a moment alone. Chase and Holland were already there when we reached it. They stood halfway between the dumpsters and the back entrance, their voices low but intense. Holland looked frantic. Chase looked irritated, like he hated being confronted but didn't mind causing chaos. Mira and I stayed far enough back that they didn't notice us right away. Their conversation drifted toward us in pieces. Holland accused Chase of ruining everything. Chase told her she'd been the one pushing boundaries. Holland tried to cover herself by claiming she was only leaning on him emotionally because she felt overwhelmed by wedding planning. He laughed under his breath, which sent a jolt of recognition through me. That same laugh had been on his face earlier when I walked into that theater. Then Holland said something that locked me in place. She told Chase she never wanted anything serious with him and that she was terrified I would find out. She said she needed the stability I provided. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about loyalty. It wasn't even about guilt. It was about losing the comfortable future she had built around me. Mira inhaled sharply beside me. I felt my pulse thicken as I registered the words. Holland wasn't just caught cheating. She had been calculating which version of her life she wanted to keep, and I had been the practical one, while Chase had been the thrill. Chase replied with something that made it worse. He said she had been messaging him for weeks, sometimes during her so-called gym sessions, and she had never once asked him to stop. He said she was only panicking now because she got caught. No hesitation. No shame. Just blunt truth. I stepped into the light so they could see me. Holland's face drained of color. Chase raised an eyebrow like he had been expecting me, even though he hadn't. The confrontation that followed didn't feel like an argument. It felt like cutting something rotten open just to watch the truth spill out. The moment I stepped toward them, the entire atmosphere shifted. Holland's expression flipped from furious to terrified in the space of a heartbeat. Chase didn't move. He just straightened his posture as if he'd been expecting me to walk into the middle of their argument, like this was all part of some twisted performance he'd been putting on all night. I stopped a few feet from them. Mira stood behind me, hesitant but brave enough to remain close. Holland took a step toward me with her palms raised as if she wanted to soften the moment before any words came out, but she hesitated. She realized there was no angle left that wouldn't expose the truth she'd been hiding. I asked her again how long things had been going on. Not with anger, not with drama, just a direct question spoken into the quiet space between us. For a moment, she looked at the ground as if she thought she could pull an answer out of the gravel. Her mouth moved, but nothing came out. Chase didn't wait for her. He said they had been fooling around for a while during her gym sessions. He didn't bother dressing it up. He didn't try to soften it. He told the truth in a way that made it sound like a casual fact, not something destructive enough to split a future in half. Mira took a step forward, shocked by his bluntness. Holland spun toward him and ordered him to stop talking, but her voice cracked too much for it to sound authoritative. She turned back to me and attempted to twist the story again, claiming she had been confused and overwhelmed by stress. She tried to frame the entire situation as something she never fully agreed to, but Chase didn't let her breathe inside that excuse. He snapped that she had been the one initiating most of it. He said she had been the one texting him every night after leaving the gym. He said she would go distant with me in the evenings because she spent that time thinking about him. Hearing that felt like leaning into a sharp object, forcing myself to confront the pain instead of pulling away. Holland panicked. She moved between us and insisted that he was lying. Her voice grew louder, desperate, and wild. She claimed he was trying to sabotage our relationship because he couldn't stand that she was choosing me. She threw every explanation at the wall, hoping one would stick. I stood still. Mira stood still. Chase leaned against the wall like a spectator who believed himself invincible. I told Holland I had heard her earlier when she thought I wasn't around. The moment I said that, she froze. Her posture deflated, and she turned her back to me as if hoping the darkness of the alley would swallow her. She didn't ask what I heard. She knew. The silence stretched long enough that the distant sounds of cars and the hum of the plaza filled the air. Holland finally whispered that she never meant for anything to happen. She claimed she kept telling herself she'd stop. She said she tried ending it. She said she cared about me. But none of those claims matched the reality she had created. None of those claims matched the video Mira recorded. None matched the theater doorway. None matched Chase's brazen confidence. When she realized I wasn't interrupting her, she started pacing. The more she spoke, the more chaotic her explanations became. She rambled about pressure. She mentioned the wedding. She brought up her friends' opinions. She talked about needing stability. She flipped between excuses so quickly that even she couldn't hold on to a coherent narrative. She wanted control, but the truth had a way of unraveling faster than she could patch it. Chase rolled his eyes and said she had been enjoying the secret more than she wanted to admit. He said she liked the thrill. He said she kept telling him the engagement felt too safe and predictable. Those words struck me in a way that felt heavier than any admission of cheating. It wasn't just betrayal. It added a layer of contempt for the future she'd built with me. She hadn't stumbled into this. She'd been bored. Bored enough to gamble everything. Holland lunged toward Chase and shoved him. It wasn't a playful push. It was the kind someone throws when they feel cornered. He barely reacted. Mira stepped closer to me, tense and ready to intervene if things escalated. I turned to leave because the conversation reached a point where nothing new could be said. I didn't want to hear excuses. I didn't want to negotiate with someone who had been strategizing how to use me for comfort while seeking excitement elsewhere. I didn't want to stay in that alley where the truth kept getting uglier with every breath. But Holland wasn't ready to let me walk away. She grabbed my arm hard enough to stop me. She begged for another chance to explain. She kept asking me not to leave until she could make sense of the situation. She didn't realize she'd used every ounce of credibility long before tonight. Her grip dug into my sleeve as if she believed force would anchor me. Before I could pull away, Chase stepped in and told her to stop embarrassing herself. That sentence flipped the entire dynamic in an instant. Holland spun around and screamed that he had ruined her life. Chase told her she ruined her own life. Their voices clashed so loudly that it drew attention from passing plaza employees. I knew this needed to end before the situation spiraled into something dangerous. I told Holland to let go. She refused. She said leaving now would destroy everything. She said she didn't want to lose me. She insisted her actions didn't reflect her feelings. But if that were true, the footage, the whispers, the body language, the lap, and the weeks of messages wouldn't exist. I pulled my arm loose, and she stumbled back a step. She immediately tried to recover her balance and grabbed for my keys. Her hand closed around them for a second before I snatched them away. The struggle was brief, but sharp enough to make Chase snicker and Mira gasp. That noise from Chase triggered something. A sudden surge of frustration. Not rage. Not violence. Just the deep realization that he reveled in chaos because it gave him leverage. He had been treating this entire collapse like something entertaining. At that moment, The back door to the theater opened, and 2 security employees stepped out. They saw the tense formation of all 4 of us. They saw Holland's frantic movements. They saw Chase's posture. They saw Myra's alert stance. They walked over quickly, ready to separate us if needed. One of them asked if everything was okay. I answered plainly, telling them there had been a personal conflict, but nothing physical had happened beyond someone grabbing my keys. Holland tried to talk over me, but her explanation came out in pieces that made less sense the more she spoke. The security employees didn't take sides. They simply asked all of us to keep distance so things wouldn't escalate. The presence of security didn't calm Holland. It made her more frantic. She kept insisting I listen to her. She said she could explain everything once we got home. Her voice shook as she begged me not to leave with the wrong idea. She stepped toward me again, but security placed a small barrier between us. Not forceful, just enough to stop her from closing the distance. Chase reacted differently. He told security he wasn't part of the problem. He tried to walk past them toward the plaza. They stopped him and asked him to wait until they understood what was happening. He didn't like that. His arrogance slipped. He turned his frustration toward Mira, blaming her for interfering. Mira finally snapped. She stepped forward and laid out exactly what she saw inside the theater, including the video she took earlier. She explained that she hadn't felt safe confronting Chase alone, and she wanted everything recorded in case he tried to twist it. Her voice remained controlled, but the exhaustion in her shoulders told me she had reached her limit. Security asked to see the video. Mira showed them. They didn't react outwardly, but something in their posture shifted. They asked everyone to move toward the front entrance to give statements separately. Holland begged me not to go with them. She pleaded for a private conversation. She said we could fix this, but nothing she asked for lined up with the disaster unfolding around us. She wanted privacy because it allowed her to shape narratives. Out here, the truth had nowhere to hide. I followed security toward the front, ready to tell the truth without embellishment. Behind me, Holland's voice cracked as she called after me. Ahead of me, consequences waited. Security led the 4 of us back toward the front entrance, keeping a respectful distance but watching us closely. The bright lights above the ticket counters made everything feel harsher. The calmer atmosphere of the plaza disappeared the moment we entered the lobby again. Holland trailed behind me, her breathing sharp and uneven. Chase kept throwing glances around the room, as if he were scouting for exits or witnesses. Mira stayed near the security officers, her body language firm and steady, ready to stand by everything she'd said. The employees motioned for us to stand apart from each other so they could get a clear understanding of the situation. They spoke to me first. I kept the explanation clean, simple, and factual. I told them what I saw when I returned with the drinks. I described the argument behind the building and the moment when Holland tried to grab my keys. I didn't exaggerate anything. I didn't make assumptions. I just laid out events in the order they happened. They nodded and took notes. When they turned to Holland, she tried to take control of the narrative immediately. She insisted the situation had been misinterpreted. She claimed that Chase had been acting inappropriately, and she had been trying to avoid him. She said Mira recorded her without permission and then conspired with me to make her look guilty. She tried to create a version of the night where she wasn't the one making dangerous choices. Her voice shook with panic, and the more she tried to force her story into coherence, the more it fell apart. The officers didn't argue with her. They just listened, then calmly asked follow-up questions that her explanations couldn't answer. They asked why she continued interacting with Chase during the movie. They asked why she followed him behind the building. They asked why she became physically aggressive trying to take my keys. None of her answers connected. Chase didn't make things easier for her. When they questioned him, he shrugged off any responsibility. He told them he wasn't involved in anything dramatic and that the entire situation had been overblown. He acted like the night was an inconvenience. He didn't defend Holland. He didn't defend himself. He just acted annoyed. When they asked him about the video, his attitude changed. He tried to claim it didn't show anything substantial. Mira stepped forward and politely told them she had seen more than that one moment. She explained the earlier hallway interaction, the whispers, the body language. She gave her side clearly and without hesitation. When they asked to see the video again, she showed it. This time, they requested to keep a copy for their internal report. She agreed. Chase's confidence cracked. Not fully, but enough to reveal that even he understood the video wasn't easy to talk his way out of. Security didn't treat him as a criminal. They didn't act aggressively, but they made one thing clear. Because of the confrontation behind the building and his involvement in escalating tensions, he was no longer welcome at the theater. They informed him they would file an incident record and forward his details to management. Chase scoffed like the decision meant nothing, but he didn't look pleased. Then came the moment that shifted everything. As security continued their questioning, Holland's parents walked into the lobby. She must have called them earlier, because the urgency in their stride told me they hadn't wasted any time. Her mother approached with the worried intensity of someone expecting a hospital-level emergency. Her father looked around with suspicion, trying to identify who the threat was. Holland ran toward them and launched into a frantic attempt to frame the night her way. She claimed she'd been cornered. She said she was being set up. She insisted Chase had harassed her and that Mira edited a video to make her look guilty. She tried to make herself the victim of a coordinated attack. Her parents tried to follow along, but her story became tangled halfway through. Her mother looked overwhelmed. Her father looked skeptical. Security stepped in to clarify that they were gathering statements because of a disturbance. They explained they had not taken sides. They explained they were simply documenting the situation. They said there was video evidence and conflicting accounts. When her father asked to see the video, Mira agreed. They stood together and watched the clip. No edits. No cuts. Just this 6-second moment that captured more truth than a 10-minute explanation could. Holland's parents remained perfectly still afterward. Her mother closed her eyes. Her father exhaled slowly, staring at the floor. Holland panicked harder. She started protesting, telling them they didn't understand, telling them the video was misleading, telling them she had been trying to resolve an unwanted situation. She reached for her mother, who took a step back. That moment broke her. She realized her story had no more footing. Her father asked her directly if she had been cheating. She broke down, shaking her head too fast, refusing to answer clearly, insisting she never intended for anything to happen. But intention didn't change the reality of what they saw. Her mother whispered something to her father, and both of them stood in stunned silence. I didn't add anything. I didn't need to. This was between them now. The officers wrapped up their questions and told us the incident was recorded and we were free to leave as long as we separated for the rest of the night. They encouraged everyone to go home and avoid further conflict. Holland walked toward me immediately, still crying, still pleading. She tried to grab my hand, but I stepped back. She begged me not to end things there. She said she could fix everything. She said she needed time. She said the engagement didn't deserve to be destroyed over one night. She didn't realize it wasn't just one night. It was everything behind it. I told her it was over. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to justify anything. The truth had spoken for itself. There was nothing left to discuss. She collapsed into her parents' arms, and they held her as she cried. Her father kept his eyes fixed on me, not with anger, but with a look that said he understood why I made my decision. Chase slipped out of the lobby, acting irritated by the entire ordeal. Mira didn't follow him. She stayed with me as I headed toward the exit. We walked to the parking lot in silence. The plaza lights felt softer out here, like the world was resetting after a storm. When we reached my car, Mira apologized for everything, even though none of it was her fault. I told her the opposite, that she had probably saved me from a much worse discovery down the line. She nodded. Then she said she needed to call a rideshare because she didn't want to get into a car with Chase ever again. I waited with her until the car arrived. Before she left, she told me she hoped things would get easier soon. I told her I hoped the same for her. When I got home, I packed a few essentials and slept on the couch. The next morning, I moved out entirely. I blocked Holland's number. I blocked her social media. I cut every channel of communication so she couldn't pull me back with guilt or confusion. Over the next week, news traveled through our friend circle. People reached out with shock, disbelief, and sympathy. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The truth had its own gravity, and it reached those it needed to. Later, I learned that Holland moved back into her parents' house and abandoned all wedding plans. She withdrew from our shared social groups and avoided anyone connected to the engagement. Her parents kept their distance from her for a while, stunned by how she handled everything. As for Chase, Mira followed through. She reported his behavior to his workplace's regional manager, and though they didn't fire him, they placed him under review. He lost Mira permanently, and he lost whatever image he thought he had built. Mira and I stayed friendly. Nothing more. Just two people who survived a night that revealed more truth than either of us expected. That night at AMC didn't ruin my life. It stopped it from being ruined later.